Blake Shelton walked into the Tonight Show studio expecting the same easygoing energy he'd always enjoyed there. Jimmy Fallon laughing too hard at his jokes, a silly game involving farm tools or blindfolded taste tests, and a crowd packed with people waving neon signs that said "We love you, Blake." But tonight, something felt different the moment his boots hit the studio floor. A stagehand brushed past him, muttering something Blake couldn't quite catch. The producer's smile seemed a bit too tight, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Even Jimmy, who usually greeted Blake with a bear hug and a goofy dance, gave him a stiff wave from behind the curtain. Blake slowed his stride, raising an eyebrow. "What in the world's going on?" he whispered under his breath. He shrugged it off and walked toward the bright, electric hum of the stage. The band launched into a lively country riff, the audience erupted in cheers, and Blake plastered on his signature grin as he stepped into the spotlight. He shook Jimmy's hand, took his seat, and leaned back comfortably. But as Jimmy shuffled nervously through his queue of cards, Blake noticed the host wasn't making eye contact. "Blake Shelton, everybody," Jimmy said a little too loudly. "We love having you here. You always bring the fun." Blake nodded. "Well, I try, though y'all look more nervous than a chicken in a coyote den tonight." The audience laughed, but Jimmy didn't. Instead, he cleared his throat and held up a card like it weighed 20 pounds. "So, Blake, Jimmy glanced at the band, then the audience, then back to Blake. "There's something that's been circulating around the industry. Some talk." Blake felt a prickle down his spine. "Talk," he repeated slowly. Jimmy exhaled, bracing himself. "There's been a serious accusation going around that you've been, sabotaging another country artist's tour." The audience gasped in a single, collective inhalation. The band stopped mid-note. Blake's smile vanished like someone had switched it off. "Sabotaging?" Blake echoed, leaning forward in disbelief. "You're saying I'm out there messing with another singer's tour?" "Me?" Jimmy wet his lips, clearly wishing he'd chosen a different night to do this. "It's just something people have been discussing. Thought maybe you'd want to address it." Blake's eyes hardened, the easy charm gone. "Address it?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Jimmy, you blindsided me with this. You think I'm gonna smile and laugh while you toss garbage rumors in my lap?" The tension was thick enough to grip. The audience shifted in their seats, unsure if they should clap, stay silent, or pull out their phones to start recording. Blake leaned even closer, his voice low but edged like a honed blade. "You know me. You've known me for years. Do I look like the kinda guy who sneaks around sabotaging people's tours? Do I seem like a man who needs to tear someone else down to climb up?" Jimmy looked rattled. "Blake, I didn't mean." "Oh, I think you meant plenty," Blake cut in. He jabbed a finger toward the card in Jimmy's hand. "You planned to bring this up. You put it on your cue card. You made it part of the conversation." Jimmy tried to laugh, but the sound fizzled embarrassingly. "Well, keeping things interesting." "Interesting?" Blake barked. "Since when did accusing someone of backstabbing become your version of interesting?" "This ain't a comedy skit, Jimmy." The studio went dead quiet. Even the cameras felt like they were holding their breath. Blake wasn't yelling, but his voice carried the impact of someone who felt blindsided and betrayed. "If there was a problem, if there was even a whiff of truth to this, you could have called me. Texted me, asked like a friend, but instead you bring it up here, with cameras rolling, like some cheap stunt." Jimmy swallowed hard. I just thought the audience would want." "The audience," Blake repeated, shaking his head. "You did it for the reaction. For views. For whatever headline you think this'll get." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable, others looked fascinated. Every set of eyes was glued to Blake. He took a deep breath, trying, unsuccessfully, to calm himself. "I came here to have fun. Talk music, laugh. But instead, here I am defending myself against nonsense live on national television." His voice sharpened, full of wounded pride. "You crossed a line, Jimmy." And the studio lights suddenly felt colder than they ever had before. The moment the show cut to its first commercial break, Jimmy tried to stand and approach Blake, but Blake stayed firmly seated, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor like he was containing a storm under his skin. Stagehands scurried around them, pretending not to listen but leaning just close enough to catch what might come next. The band members whispered among themselves, their instruments resting silent in their laps, a rare sight on a show that prided itself on upbeat, uninterrupted energy. "Blake," Jimmy said softly, stepping closer, "I think we should reset. Start the next segment fresh." Maybe just move on to the new album. Blake slowly lifted his head, and the look he gave Jimmy froze the host mid-step. It wasn't rage alone, it was disappointment, frustration, and something that stung deeper. Betrayal. Jimmy, Blake said, speaking in a low voice meant for him alone, if you think we can just reset after you ambushed me with that garbage, you're living on another planet. Jimmy's face tightened, his usually boyish charm replaced with uncertainty. I wasn't trying to ambush you. Honestly, it was trending, and producers thought. Don't put this on your producers, Blake snapped, rising from his chair so quickly the mic clipped to his jacket tugged at the wire. You're the one holding the cards. You're the one reading the questions. You could have shut it down. You didn't. Blake stepped away from the desk just as the stage manager called out, back in 5. Jimmy looked to Blake, pleading silently for cooperation, but Blake wasn't giving an inch. The band prepared for the return from commercial break with a soft riff, low, unsure, lacking its usual swagger. Please, Jimmy mouthed. Blake didn't answer. The red recording light flashed once again, the applause cue sign lit up, and the audience clapped, hesitantly, awkwardly, welcoming a segment that already felt heavier than any late-night comedy show should. We're back with Blake Shelton, Jimmy said, his smile forced, his voice too high. And, everything's good. We're good. He made a small circular motion with his hand, trying desperately to recapture rhythm. So, Blake's new album, hold up, Blake interrupted, his voice cutting clear through the studio like a blade. The audience fell silent immediately. Jimmy blinked. Sorry, you want to say something? Yes, Blake said, turning toward the cameras. I want to set the record straight. Jimmy froze. This was not the direction he had hoped for. Blake planted a hand firmly on the arm of his chair and looked straight into the camera lens, the intensity radiating off him like heat. To anyone watching, he began, voice steady but edged with controlled fire, let me be absolutely clear. I have never sabotaged anyone's tour. Not once. Not ever. If I don't like someone, I'll tell them to their face. That's who I am. The audience murmured, but they were captivated. And while we're clearing things up, Blake continued, I think it's pretty low that my character got dragged into question. On a show where I've always come as a friend. The emphasis on the last word was sharp, pointed straight at Jimmy. Jimmy shifted nervously behind his desk. Blake, I didn't mean. Blake turned to him. Jimmy, man, stop talking in circles. You messed up, and you know it. The audience held their breath. Some covered their mouths. A few exchanged wide-eyed looks that said, oh my God, this is really happening. Jimmy's shoulders slumped as he finally nodded. You're right, I went too far. Blake didn't soften. Yeah, you did. A beat of silence. Then Blake sighed, the first sign of his anger melting just enough for weariness to show through. I came here tonight expecting laughter. Jokes. A good time. That's what this show is about. But you blindsided me, and now we're sitting in this mess. Jimmy swallowed hard. I really am sorry, Blake. Apologies don't erase damage, Blake said quietly. Words stick, especially when said on TV. The studio was so still the cameras could almost hear the hum of the lights overhead. Jimmy looked down, defeated. Is there anything I can do to fix it? Blake took a long moment before answering. He stood, adjusting his jacket, his movements calm but final. Yeah, he said, next time, just be a friend, not a headline chaser. With that, Blake gave a firm nod to the audience, an unspoken thank you, and turned toward backstage. Blake, wait, Jimmy called out, but Blake didn't. His boots echoed across the stage as he walked off, not in a rage-filled stomp, but in a cool, deliberate exit that somehow carried more weight than yelling ever could. The audience burst into nervous chatter. Jimmy sat frozen, staring at the empty chair where Blake had been just moments before. The cameras shakily cut to another emergency commercial break. Minutes later, social media flooded with clips, opinions, debates, and countless angles of the eruption that had unfolded live. Hashtags soared into trending lists. Commentators dissected every second, and the late-night world buzzed with one undeniable truth. No one had ever walked off Jimmy Fallon's show quite like Blake Shelton just had.